Welcome to the Criminologist Podcast. Our goal here is to educate and enlighten our listeners, focusing on the latest and greatest evidence-based interventions to help individuals desist from a life of crime and delinquency. And not only those factors which drive folks into crime, we also look at the reasons why people exit a life of crime. Also, we attempt to paint an accurate picture of that journey from the perspective of the justice-involved individual. Too often, our perceptions of those involved in the system are tainted by media-driven caricatures created to sell newspapers or movie tickets. This adds little to a healthy dialogue as to how to best address criminality. This podcast will avoid stereotypes and biases. We will endeavor to accomplish the first two goals in a way that keep you, the listener, interested and even entertained. And now, the host of The Criminologist, Joseph Arvidsson.
Hello and welcome to episode 60 of the Criminologist Podcast. Happy to have you all with us today. Hey, before I forget, I wanted to acknowledge the achievement of one of the friends of our show, David Hayes, who has been a guest. He was on back in episode 30, you may recall. David is the founder of Nomadic Paddler out of the United Kingdom. On our show, he talked at length as to his journey of self-discovery and how he combined his love for adventure and bringing people together. And to that end, David recently set 4 world records in the area of stand-up paddling. Specifically, he set 4 stand-up paddleboard records, world records, on 4 lakes in 4 countries in 4 days. Those lakes being in Scotland, England, Northern Ireland, and Wales. David is raising money along the way for the Alliance of Sport. The mission of Alliance of Sport is to build better and a safer society through the use of sports in the criminal justice system and by actively helping their network in their efforts to reduce violence, crime, and reoffending. I will leave a link in the show notes of this episode for those of you interested in learning more or donating to Nomadic Paddler and the great work that David is doing. Hey, speaking of journeys, today I am going to be introducing you to an individual who has agreed to share his incredible journey with us all. Ryan Buzzard is currently founder and CEO of the Way of Sobriety. He is an addiction recovery reformer as well as a corrections reform consultant. He hosts a podcast of his own entitled The Way of Sobriety, in which he sets out to, quote, truly break stigma for prisoners, ex-cons, and addicts once and for all. I am so pleased to share with you my recent conversation with Ryan. Let me share that now, and I will see you all on the other side. Why don't we start off, Ryan, by you telling us just a little bit about yourself and, generally speaking, the journey that you've been on.
Well, my journey is one of self-imposed emotional isolation, one of self-imposed adversity. I'm the middle child of a blended family. When my father abandoned me as a toddler, I, for some reason, chose to reject attachments to any adult figures in my life. The roller coaster of childhood, as well as the hopeless search for masculinity and adulthood, were challenges that I was ill-equipped to confront, as you might imagine. I never struggled academically or with making friends, though our family relocated 4 times throughout my elementary years. During my high school and college years, the lack of adult mentorship and responsible accountability from older figures left me to take cues from music and media to define what type of man and adult I would grow into. I developed core beliefs that set me up to fail. I had nobody to teach me the wrongs of my thoughts. I had nobody speaking life into me or drawing out my soulful purpose and my dream because I rejected anyone that might have ever attempted to develop that sort of bond with me. Thus, I was bound to experience tragedy of my own creation. My young teen years of drug use turned to young adult years of drug abuse that turned to years of drug dependency and absolute homeless isolation. I journeyed directly to a life that I'd never dreamt I'd live. My mark on the world at this point was entirely despicable. Something that drives my passion to be a good man every day now. The PA Department of Corrections rescued the world and myself from any further trauma that my life choices were creating. It's entirely foreign for normal citizens to believe that a man or woman could wake up in a jail cell to the feelings of freedom and escape. But that's what happens in some cases, and it's what happened in my case. Addiction was the natural progression of the life of isolation and misdirection that I wrongfully embarked on as a child. Addiction fueled criminality and a degradation of my morals. I despised who I was and had no idea how to find my way to the man I would be proud to look at in the mirror. When I woke up in a jail cell the morning after my arrest, I knew it was the beginning to a new life. I knew I would be spending a few years behind bars, and I felt blessed for that. I had a deep sense of appreciation for the chance to finally embark on the journey of discovering myself. With tears in my eyes, I vowed that I was never going to be the old me ever again. That my days in jail were going to be my school of hard knocks to uncover the treasure that I was always meant to be. I've spent every day of my life since October 23rd, 2011, intentionally growing mentally, spiritually, and physically. Along the way, I've found forgiveness. I found relationships with living angels. I found the answers to the questions I've always misunderstood. I found myself. Today, I'm a man of strong convictions and deeply held principles. I'm a calm but confident man of integrity. I proudly and honorably lead my family of 2 fantastic children alongside my best friend and the love of my life, Roxanne. I'm a 4.0 psychology undergrad at Capella University with 5 courses left. I'm a 3rd year full-time employee at a local Porta-John and trucking company. I'm a board member for a 501c3 that is single-handedly assisting in youth corrections by infusing that sector with applications that promote personal growth and a redefining of the probation officer offender relationship. That company is called My New Leaf Incorporated, if anybody's interested in looking them up. Shameless plug, sorry. I'm a lived experience consultant, podcast creator, and host at thewayofsobriety.com. Today I'm a man that is humbled by my past, proud of my personal growth, and brought down to earth by my daily philosophy of striving to be a living amends for the harms I've caused. When I look in the mirror today, I love who I see.
You touched on this, Ryan. You are the founder and CEO of The Way of Sobriety. Talk about that as well as your podcast, if you would, please.
Sure. Well, let me preface this by saying that the word sobriety, it gave a few people that I had asked about being on the show, it gave them a little hesitation because they said, I like to drink a beer once in a while. And I actually ended up making an entire episode where I discussed that sobriety is more than simply abstaining from drugs, and that in some cases, people who choose to use drugs to remain sober-minded, that it helps them to navigate the stressors of their life somehow. I mean, that's not my life. I can't manage that. I can't do that. It doesn't work for me. But it works for some people. And so let's preface this with that so people understand the sobriety part. And the Way of Sobriety is twofold. It's my lived experience consulting business as well as an intellectual outlet in the way of a podcast. It's the Who Are You of Sobriety. It's my brainchild that birthed from much emotional and intellectual exploration. Along my journey to redefine who I am in this world and the way that the world sees me, I've been met with much resistance. I experienced disrespect and moral injustice following my incarceration in countless ways. Much of my experience enlightened my eyes to the stigmas and spurred on my wish to challenge them. I could see clearly how easily someone without a strong will to always do the right thing and succeed, no matter that cost, might revert to a life of criminality. I want to challenge minds with new perspectives. I want to offer people who are often disregarded a voice to teach the world something that's special to them. I want to offer the world a look at the side of people that they might simply wish to push aside and label as unworthy of respect due to their past life choices. The full scope of what I'm doing is yet to be defined because I've just begun. And the positive ways of a good deed, it's never fully measured. But I'm moving onward in hopes that what I'm attempting might be fruitful like your show is.
I stumbled across this quote of yours, and I absolutely love it. So I'm going to read it to the audience first, then ask you to speak to it. You said, quote, "My hope is to elicit change in the way that people conceptualize who a person with adversity in their past actually is. That people polish the treasure they are during their journey of self-discovery and evolution." So powerful. Speak to that if you would, please, Ryan.
Sure. When a person self-reflects and they endeavor to become a better version of themselves, they often succeed greatly. So many people in the world don't realize that felons, ex-cons, addicts, and the like are way more than the sum of their past life experiences. When we ignore those defining experiences and simply shine a light on the new person that someone becomes after their personal growth journey, I personally believe that many people in this world would be extremely surprised at what they find.
Yeah, I could not agree more. In your experiences, and just broadly speaking at least, what works in rehabilitation and reentry, and conversely, what does not work?
That's a big question. Rehabilitation and reentry, for me, started from day one of my incarceration. In my experience, what worked was being fed up with my life prior to incarceration, being ashamed of who I was, and dreaming incessantly about a new reality that I had no idea how to attain. My daily philosophy to grow mentally, spiritually, and physically each day kept my sights focused on creating a past that I would not be ashamed of. In the beginning of my incarceration, I read Man's Search for Meaning, and Viktor Frankl writes in that, "Imagine first that the present is past, and second, that the past may be changed and amended." When you awake each day with an outlook that your history is defined by what you do in each and every moment, you inevitably choose the choice that creates a past that you can be proud of. And that's something that I took to heart at the beginning of my incarceration, and it's something that I'd carried through in my life ever since. I believe that the Department of Corrections should be redefined as the Department of Connections. Each and every person that's brought into an internment would be adopted into the fold of respectful and responsible leadership of staff, alumni, people that got out and get to come back and be a big brother, big sister, and neighbors. They would each be met with mental health, spiritual health, and physical health professionals that are actually accessible often. Internments would be spent connecting people to people who can nurture healing and growth. People would overcome their inner traumas and be given guidance to uncover and polish the treasure that lies within themselves. What does not work is isolation, punishment, moral injustices, and stagnant time for idle minds. The current system occupies minds with physical outlets and, in Pennsylvania, meaningless programming. And I say meaningless because the HVAC program that I graduated from was laughable to all potential employers upon my release. Programming should be about developing human capital that actually has a true potential to get individuals into a career once they're released. Programming that creates certified peer specialists or pastors should be offered to short-term individuals as well as the long-term individuals, rather than being utilized in a self-serving way to elicit culture change through graduating long-term inmates so that the DOC benefits from the most service over time. And for God's sakes, bring back the Pell Grant so that people can receive a formal education that is respected in society. We have to develop the human capital that is in the DOC's care.
The Department of Corrections, I absolutely love that. And you mentioned augmenting human capital, and those connections go a long, long way in augmenting their social capital as well. Great segue to my next question, which is, what piece of advice would you give to a warden or a community corrections, probation parole director looking to make serious changes in how they do business?
Well, in my humble opinion, counts and lower incident rates are not the only sign of success. You succeed when the men and women in your care, including your correctional staff, go to sleep at night feeling safe and hopeful about the future. And hopeful about the future is the key there. Take a walk around the blocks more often. Show the men and women that you're accessible. Hire more staff so that your employees aren't overworked. Hire more social workers and people with bachelors in psychology as guards. They know how to deal with people in a better manner. Don't be so afraid of the words inmate leadership. Your long-term residents are your greatest asset. You manage the staff that oversees their home. Give them an ear to speak to you confidentially. Give them their confidence and act on their wishes. The most influential things I learned, aside from my readings in prison, came from lifers who reached out and spoke life and encouragement to me. These men are the ones who are respected in your institution on a level unlike you or your staff. Changing culture with their respect will garner a greater change than changing culture through respect that is garnered out of fear.
Wow, that is so insightful. Same question as above, giving some advice. This time, though, directed at those well-intentioned probation officers that are just, they're looking to up their game, though. What advice would you give them?
I'd say be accessible. Don't refuse permissions for things that are trivial. When I first came home from prison, I had a probation officer or a parole officer that he wouldn't respond to me about anything. I'd ask him if I could go to see fireworks with my family across town, and he just would ignore me. I would ask if I could stay out past curfew an hour to visit my family, and he would just ignore me. It was just his MO to just be non-existent unless he needed something from me. So be accessible and give permission for stuff that's trivial. There was a study done that I can't really remember the specifics of it, but in which participants were asked to fill out a survey. Prior to the survey, one group was witness to a moral injustice, while the other group wasn't. Can't remember the exact statistics, but I do remember that the results showed that the participants that witnessed or experienced the moral injustice were overwhelmingly more apt to stealing the pen that was given to them to fill out the survey. Moral injustice spurs moral corruption. Don't treat your parolees as a check mark on paper. Be personable. and show respectful attention to the men and women under your care. Envision your job as one of big brother, big sister, leading your pupil to a life of prosperity and happiness. You hold the power to speak life and encouragement into the lives under your care. Be a mentor. Be a leader. Be the word of reason and a connection to community resources. You're not a correctional officer for the streets that simply checks in and sees that people are adhering to the rules. You're a link to the future.
Yeah, you spoke of the importance of relationships, and loyal listeners of this show know we talk about those so-called evidence-based practices all the time. But at the end of the day, you're right, Ryan, it boils down to relationships are the foundation of making any of those research-driven practices take hold. What, in your opinion, is one thing that the public gets wrong about prisons and or our rehabilitation efforts?
I think that people have the wrong idea of what prison should be used for. I think people get it wrong when they say that people deserve to be locked up and have the key thrown away. They get it wrong when they deem a person nothing but evil and expect the world to feel the same way about the person that victimized them. Even people who never get to come back to society have potential to change the world in a positive way, if that's the route they choose to live. The person that is deemed unworthy of life may be healing souls and displaying proper respect and etiquette to the men and women that will one day be your neighbor. Who knows? Maybe the exact person that victimized you may one day be your neighbor. And if you can find forgiveness for yourself, you can heal and you can live your life more fully and not hurt yourself so much throughout the rest of your life. They actually say that unforgiveness lowers your life expectancy. People also get it entirely wrong when they think that prison isn't real life. When I came home, I was told by a psychiatrist that my time in prison wasn't real sobriety time because I was in prison, and that makes it easier to stay sober. She couldn't have been more inaccurate. My life is my life no matter where I am. Prison was a place where I was forced to be in contact with people that were using and selling drugs daily. Outside of prison, I have the choice to avoid that. And I haven't been around anybody that uses and sells drugs since, that I know of. So, now that psychiatrist would like her to tell me exactly why my time in sobriety isn't valuable time in my life that I deserve to be proud of. I stayed sober. And that time also led to the development of the man I am today. It was real time in my life. Shouldn't be disregarded as, yeah, but you were in prison. A lot of times people get that misconception that time in prison is just stagnant, that there's nothing happening, like it's in a vacuum almost, and that's not an accurate depiction of what's going on there. Successes in prison in a person's life are just as valid as successes that happen on the street. And the stress, I can understand people trying to say that the stressors of living life on the street are different than living the life in prison, but the stressors are different. But I would argue that the stressors I experienced in prison were much worse than the stressors I'm experiencing in real life. I haven't seen anybody getting stabbed with a pencil in the last 6 years. That's a blessing.
Yeah, so insightful. Thank you for sharing that. I know you are an extremely busy man. What's on the horizon for Ryan Buzzard?
Fatherhood, being a husband, and learning more about manhood in both of those situations. As I said, I have 5 classes left in my bachelor's degree. I'm anticipating a psychology master's degree afterwards, or possibly criminal justice, I'm not sure. Definitely more podcast episodes. I'm not entirely sure what my future holds. but I know it entails me being the best husband and father that I can be while I have the honor of being alive to do so. My future is in the hands of God. I just keep my eyes on Him and try my best to be the man that I'm called to be so that I can accomplish the tasks that He needs of me before my life ends. I hope to finish my assignments I'm given.
I love your positive outlook, Ryan. Ryan Buzzard is the founder and CEO of the Way of Sobriety. Check out his podcast. I'll leave a link in the episode description of this podcast so you can link to Ryan's podcast as well. Thank you for your time, Ryan. I hope you'll come back and give us some updates in the future.
Absolutely. I'd be honored to do so. Thank you for having me.
All right. Be well, Ryan. Another great example there of why we love having individuals with lived experiences on the show to share their unique insights, which you just heard there from Ryan. Some of the themes that I took from there, some of the highlights, when Ryan talked about listening to the individuals within the correctional facilities, within the prisons. You've heard this echoed from other guests on the show, whether it be Dr. Sarah Lewis or any of the members of her team from Penal Reform Solutions who've been on the show, saying that small investment of listening to those persons whom, as Ryan said, this is their home, and that feedback is just so valuable when it comes to better outcomes and safer facilities. Ryan also spoke to his experiences after release back in the community when he spoke of his time on supervision, and his advice to probation and parole officers was essentially just be accessible. And that's one of the things we know from the research as well. And you heard me say in this interview that all of our evidence-based practices are predicated on a strong working alliance. And if we don't have that relationship piece, we're really muting all of our other evidence-based efforts. And then finally, he talked about the habit that practitioners often have of discounting an individual's prison experience as though that time was spent in a vacuum. Ryan again said, hey, we need to stop doing that and really acknowledge successes that occur in prison. He was talking about his success around sobriety, and he also reminded and encouraged practitioners not to discount the stressors that take place in prison. I chuckled at his line about he hasn't seen somebody stabbed with a pencil in the last 6 years. Great stuff from Ryan Buzzard. I am going to leave a link to his podcast in the show notes of this episode. Check out his podcast, The Way of Sobriety. Hey, I want to thank Thomas Saunders, my musical engineer. Thomas composed and plays the music you're listening to now, which takes us out every episode. So thank you for that, Thomas. Back next week with a fresh episode. In the meantime, you may contact the show or reach out to us through our website, theparagongroup.llc.com, for training or presentations as to evidence-based practices and or implementation, or of course, the topic of desistance from crime. If you have questions or comments as to this podcast, feel free to contact the show via our email at thecriminologistpodcast@gmail.com. That's thecriminologistpodcast@gmail.com. Remember to follow us through our Facebook page and or our Instagram page at The Criminologist Podcast. New fun images and videos are being added all the time to those feeds. You don't want to miss out. We are also on Twitter, the Criminologist Media Group. Our Twitter handle is at Crim Media Group, CRIM Media Group. Go ahead and give us a follow. You can also connect with me, Joseph Arvidsson, on LinkedIn, and follow both the Criminologist Podcast and the Paragon Group on our LinkedIn pages. Lastly, if you've not already done so, check out and subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Criminologist, for additional content as to the themes of this podcast. Merchandise is available. If you're interested, simply reach out to the show. And if you believe in what we're doing here, if you're part of the movement, please spread the word. Tell a friend or a coworker or a colleague about us. Ask them to subscribe to the show. And of course, do so yourself if you've not already done so. And always remember, folks, there's no them, there's only us.
Just sitting at my desk at home when I stabbed myself with a pencil in my eye.
The Criminologist Podcast is a production of the Paragon Group, LLC. For speaking engagements, interviews, program design, training opportunities, or to contact the host, please visit us at theparagongroup.llc.com. Click on the Contact Us tab in the upper right-hand side of the page. Be sure to give us a 5-star review, and thanks for listening.
The thoughts, statements, and opinions of the host and cast members do not necessarily reflect the views of their employers and are those of the host and cast themselves. Any discussion regarding client statements, behaviors, actions, or crimes are purely fictional and are used only for the purposes of example. Any examples that could be deemed to be related to an actual individual or individuals are incidental.